Don't weep alone. It's fun in some sense to challenge yourself. See all the obstacles as challenges and how to go through them and come out intact with your dignity, with your confidence. And it will make you a larger person, a bigger person. And in some ways, when I was living through shaking with cold in the winter, have a half empty stomach, it was very difficult to endure. And I thought that I envied my classmates and people around me who had a father with them and who had parents who could provide for them. But now to think back, I would never exchange my life with anyone's, because you know why? I would not have been who I am today. I would not have all the inspirational stories to tell today.
Melting Pot, a global podcast series hosted by Payal, connects guests who have inspiring stories and reaches out to a multicultural audience over 52 countries. Guests are diverse, such as celebrities, entrepreneurs, travelers, and many more who've had a turning point in their lives and moved over to a holistic lifestyle. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, social media. Hi everyone. Today I am in conversation with Qin Sun Stubis. Qin is a writer. She's a newspaper columnist. She's an author of an award-winning book, which is called Once Our Lives, Life, Death, and Love in the Middle Kingdom. She's an immigrant to America, and I'm not sure how many years she's been living there for. So we're going to understand that from Qin herself directly. But I also wanted to add a little bit about the book, because it is a true story of 4 generations of Chinese women who struggle against the gigantic historical tides sweeping over them, as well as an ancient prophecy that seems to change their fates. So this is absolutely fascinating, and I completely understand why it's an award-winning book. Thank you so much for joining me today, Qin. I'm really excited and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Paya. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to talking to you, because your podcast is so wonderful. It tells stories of culturally diverse people, and then enhances and supports the people, the other peoples on their journeys. And I think that all these stories are just so inspirational. So really enjoying your podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Qin. I think it's important for the whole objective of this podcast is to be able to make a difference in whatever way possible. And even if it impacts the life of one person or it inspires one person, and talking to all these wonderful guests, including yourself, if there is any kind of change that is possible, I think I feel humbled when I hear these kind of very positive feedback. So thank you so much for that. But we have to talk about you. So let's begin with talking a little bit about your background. If you could also describe your early life growing up during the Great Chinese Famine.
Oh, Lord, it's been quite a long life journey. In some ways, I almost feel that I have lived several people's lives, because life goes through revolution, famine, and struggling against the poverty, starvation. And then I went on to go to college, managed to go to college in China for 4 years. And then I became a tour guide for the Westerners because I could speak English. And then I took 2 suitcases and myself went across the ocean and come to America. I got my master's degree, and then I got married, and I ended up having 2 children and a loving husband, and I have graduated from their colleges. So it's quite a long, extended journey. And the beginning of it and the end of it, if you just connect the 2 ends together, it does not even seem to make sense. I was born in a shanty town in Shanghai, China in 1960. And at the time, my parents were so poor, they had to go out, look for jobs so could make the family survive. And what happened is my mother had to, soon after her birth to me, she left me in a bamboo crib in the middle of a one-room wooden upside down box for about 2 years. I was mostly unattended during the day. And even though my grandparents, my father's family, had a larger wooden hut in the shanty town, the very reason why they ended up to be there was right next door, like a one thing wall made of wooden planks. That's how the two are connected. And I had 5 aunts, one uncle, and a pair of grandparents from my father's side. Nobody seemed to care about my existence. And I was just in the crib by myself for 8 hours and more when my mother was away. And so after 2 years, and it was a time government encouraged women to have more children, unlike what people know about China now for having one family, one child. At the time, most of my classmates had, I even know, 6, 8, 10 children in a family. So the government didn't have enough facilities to take care of the children. They would only promise to take the children when they're 2 years and beyond. And so my mother took me when I was, and they were alarmed. They told me that your daughter is paralytic and she's disabled. We couldn't take care of her. And my mother cried the entire way home because she had this grand hope and wish that now that I was two, and some people would be able to take care of me, and I could play with the other children. And she was very upset. In order to help, she had to quit her job. And she, lucky for her, for me really, my grandfather was a general manager for a watch and clock shop before the revolution. And she still had a watch, a gold watch left, that given to by my grandfather. She actually went to a pharmacist and swapped for calcium pills and fish oil. And she stayed with me and took care of me, probably more doting than any mother could have done, because she was really worried that I would just be paralyzed for life. And so that was the beginning of my life. And I probably wouldn't even know about the story except when I supposed to be, my younger sister was potty trained. And I think she did not want me to feel bad, lower my self-esteem. There's something wrong with me. So she told me what happened when I was very young. And in some ways, I really forgive my mother because she had no other choice. Afterwards, she told me there were nights that she had to give my older sister like a milk candy or two, and they were tiny milk candies, and that would be her dinner, and say time to go to bed. And when you wake up, it would, maybe we would have some food. Maybe mommy would be able to make you this and that. So she actually went to the morning market and searched for vegetables that were thrown away. And some vendors got used, knew her, and started to put away some of the food for her, mostly vegetables. And then she tucked my sister to bed, and she would say, well, tomorrow it would be a better day. Tomorrow, mommy might be able to find food, make you a great dinner. And she lured my sister to bed. And that's how we lived. And my father was in a faraway place cutting bamboo in a bamboo forest. Those giant bamboo was used for scaffolding for the construction or reconstruction more at a time of the old buildings left by the British and the French and the other countries. So we lived like that, always never had enough food and always poor. And throughout, even, and then the Cultural Revolution came in 1960, the year I went to school. And I started out going to school with Mao's quotation book. It's a little red book in a little red plastic container instead of the school book, like a backpack or school bag. And that's how I went to school and I learned to read and write. I love Chairman Mao. I love my motherland. I want to defend my motherland, words like that, not only in Chinese, but also in English when I was a fifth grader in the elementary school. And we studied Karl Marx. We mostly had about quite often like a half a day of school. And in the afternoon, we just set free because the teachers had to study Mao's philosophy and kind of re-educate the teachers. So that kind of education went on until I was about in the high school. And our existence was also similar. My father in some ways got worse. My father was detained, jailed for about 7 years during the Cultural Revolution for being accused for anti-cultural revolution. So often he was not even given his salary and left my mother scrambling for her existence and then for little girls to feed. And I remember how she had a little suitcase and had her old things, whether it's a jade lock or silver spoon or like a mahogany chopsticks, a piece of brocade fabric. She managed to sell those things. They were even lacquer tea trays from old days, from her old family home. So she managed to then bring home some rice and feed us. And it went on and we managed to live. But she always told us, encouraged us to read one more book and study well. And we also learned about America, how my mother's mother was a sea captain, and he used to travel to America through the commercial ship. And he actually was perished during the what do you call the Pacific War, and he was on the ship from somewhere between Vietnam and to Brazil, a whole cargo of charcoal, and it was torpedoed because the Japanese forced them to put on Japanese flag. And American warships thought it was a Japanese ship and set the ship on fire. And the last thing we knew was my grandfather plunged into the Pacific Ocean, and there was an elderly man who held on to a piece of a floating ship and later on got rescued and came back and told the story. So I grew up with stories. My mother told us all the stories, how her cousin went with my grandfather to New York City and landed in Manhattan and never went back to the ship. Ended up in America. And he would visit my grandmother and the family and stories like that. So I was enchanted as a child by stories. I loved storytelling because my mother was a trained actress. She was good at she had a fantastic memory, and she would describe things in great details and with such a flair that as a child my eyes would grow bigger. And the story is how she was kidnapped the pirates, how she got a brother. My grandfather used the gold and brought back home from the opium den a son, because my mother's father always wanted a son. So how that was the adopted grandfather. So my mother had two sets of grandparents. Her life was very turbulent and traumatic in many ways. And my book, Once Our Lives, actually recount all those old fantastic stories from her mouth to
So
my
it
memory.
so it's your family. It's essentially the four women that you talk about in the book. It's all stories about your family and the women from your family.
The women from two families, from my father's family and from my mother's family, each of four generations of stories that I've heard. My father, my mother told me about the older generations, my mother of her own lives with her parents, and my own eyes and my own existence in China that I saw of my mother's lives and my grandparents' lives. And more, it was a huge historical backdrop because China went through so much during the last 120 years, and how the four generations went from riches to rags, then how the family struggled back to swim to the top, and how the women were being prejudiced against simply for being women. And my mother gave birth to four girls, and there was no boy. And that was the reason why I was in the shanty town in the middle of the crib. Nobody came to see me because my older sister was a girl. And my mother gave, how dare actually, my mother gave to another girl. And it was, how to say, humiliating the family ancestors, and we were being shameful. We're not like, they rather not to see us. And that was the whole reason nobody cared. Nobody really cared whether my mother told me once when my father was locked up for so long, we ran out of things to sell. We had no food. And my mother said to me, I was very scared. When she said to me, she looked at me with such a serious face. She said, even if we starve to death right now, nobody would ever know. It was very alarming. As a child, I had no ability and then knew no one to go for help for. And my father was locked away. He was the person supposed to provide. My mother was the one stayed home with the four kids, and she really worked hard to try to make us alive. And that's what she said to me. So it was very scary. And he finally got home in 1975 and didn't have to be locked up again, and with very poor health and everything. And Nixon visited Shanghai and signed the Shanghai Communique when my father was actually still locked up, very close by, about a block or two away from where Nixon stayed. And then my father came, he got a wage, and both my parents encouraged us, always encouraged us to study well. And I always knew growing up, I was a raggedy doll. I had a patched clothes and an empty stomach, but I always did the best in my class. I actually was selected to go to college and ended up in a very prestigious institute called the Shanghai Institute of Foreign Languages. It was the second best language institute in China. And I felt very privileged and very happy to be able to go to such a fancy school in a sense. And at the time, because the entrance examination for college was just resumed for the first time, and since the communism took over, so a lot of the old books were dust laden, they were spider laced, and I found Shakespeare, Chaucer, Spencer, Milton, Thomas Hardy. And my 4 years of school, I was buried in books. I felt myself like the more I read, the more I became like a Victorian girl of some sort. All these romantic stories, and how many times you read and shared your tears. And I learned English, and I just was devouring everything. And in some sense, I didn't even understand all these were books written in different eras, and I didn't really know like a one word in the old days, and maybe a word no more. And so when I first came to America, everybody laughed because I wouldn't use very old words, and people would laugh and say, I haven't heard that word maybe for 100 years. But that's how I learned
So
English. And
how did you adapt to a different life, different culture? Because you said that you came to America for your master's, right?
I felt I was Dorothy that I was not in Kansas anymore. In a sense, two suitcases of myself. I left my mother, my father, all my savings because I want to make sure they would be able to live. Why I went away for adventure. I was 29 years old, and my father came back from prison the second time for accused of being for cultural revolution. So he spent 14 years in jail, 7 years for being
Against it.
against the Cultural Revolution during the Cultural Revolution. And then when the revolution was over, he was sent to jail for being for the revolution. So I took care of the family when my jail. When he came back, I was 29. I felt either to go and see the world, or I would never go anywhere anymore. So I decided to take two suitcases. I applied for a master's degree in University of Arizona, and I came to the United States with two suitcases and not much more, and ended up in a university. And it was very strange because America is so huge. Even English didn't sound the same when you were in different parts of the United States. And America is very much a melting pot. And in Arizona, it's mostly Caucasian, but there were some African Americans, there were some American Indians. I even made a friend with an American Indian girl. We used to meet in the library, and we studied very different things. So we couldn't really study together, but we used to talk. And it was a very scary because you're in a college, you're mostly with Americans, the food was different. I never ate salads in my life. We always cooked the vegetables. And suddenly I didn't eat a chicken in China because we raised chickens. They were my friends. And I came to America. I cannot ask what I would eat and not eat. I would be eating whatever I am given to. And then sometimes I would like go out and salads. That's safe because it's vegetables. Then I was shocked. I was given a giant plate of raw vegetables. I'm like, how am I supposed to eat it? So I learned from the very beginning, but I was a fast person to learn. I learned about the new world. I learned to accept new people. I learned everything just the same way I learned fast from someone who didn't know much English to studying Shakespeare, to remember, to enjoying Robert Burns, learn the sonnets, all those things. So I was a fast learner. I was determined to learn the new things. Wasn't that what I supposed to come and do? Otherwise, why did I even bother to leave China? At the time, I had a pretty stable life, a great income, and I could even take care of my parents with my income. At the time, they had no money because my father was fired for anti revolution, but I had enough to take care of everybody. But so when I leave China, I wanted to see the world. I wanted to learn the world. And I think it's a lesson for all immigrants. We choose to leave our country, the place we know, and we want to seek a future for our children, for ourselves. And we end up in the largest melting pot. That's America. There's no larger melting pot than America. And then why do you bother to hide in the Chinatown, Korean town? Of course, you have language barrier, but it's still good to go out, to reach out to the whole population. I want to be American, not just by for the name's sake. I want to be a true American, which means I have to learn everything. I enjoying whole family. We enjoying to cook Indian food, French food, Korean food, even Yugoslavia food, or anything that I see a recipe, food that I love. We go to African restaurants, tear the bread apart like a tablecloth, and then put the food into it, and we eat everything. We learn to enjoy just the whole world. That's why we left the country. We want to be what I call myself an earthling. I'm an earthling, and I can be transplanted anywhere around the world, and I'm always a part of it. I'm a piece of cloud that can float from one nation to another. There is no boundary.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel. It's great.
Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. So, have you tried to teach your children about their Chinese heritage, or how have they accepted that because they were obviously born and they grew up in America?
I felt that how mother taught me my upgrowing, she did a great job. So I try to emphasizing on the same part. They are Americans. My husband is American. We're very much a melting pot. My husband's side of the family, his father was from Latvia, an immigrant from Latvia. His mother was of French and English. So my children are very mixed. And I've also learned from my mother. Storytelling is a wonderful thing. So they grew up. I used to tell them stories of my past, how we were always hungry and never let one piece grain of rice drop anywhere on the table, on the floor. We managed to clean it and eat it. To this day, my children would never leave one grain of rice in the bowl when they remember how important it is to save food. It's not that how much money you have, and now I can go out, probably fill my house with rice. But and we have so much, but I want to make sure that nothing is being wasted, because I rather, and also our kids were taught very early on, the second they learn to write, my husband for every Christmas would put a check on the table, and my daughter would write the numbers, the Arabic numbers. My son would write the English way of writing the numbers, and my husband would sign the signature and tell them that this check is for the children, for the people, the UNICEF and Doctors Without Border, for the people who are suffering, who need help. And so for every holiday, we have to remember these people. And even though we were not a rich family, my husband works for not for profit. He's a good deed doer and always tries to help the others. And my kids, they really grow up to have the best of everything. They're American children, but they never ask me for name brand things. They grew up wearing hand me downs. And all my friends in the neighborhood knew who I was. And when they have good, decent clothes, they would always drop off. And I would let my kids pick the clothes. And they grew up like that way. But when they went to college, I made sure they would go to the best college they wanted to go to. And I made it sure that they do not borrow a penny. And I said, I may not have money for your weddings, but I want to make sure you have the best education. So my son graduated from MIT with a mathematical degree. He just got graduated with a doctoral of mathematics from Johns Hopkins University, theoretical mathematics. That's his passion. So I want to make sure what he wants. I don't want the kids to have what I want. Oh, you want to be a doctor that you can make a lot of money. No, whatever the kids love, that's their passion, and they do well on that. And my daughter, who loves arts, so she ended up in Tufts University. She studied in the School of Museum of Fine Arts, and currently she is a director in a place called a Studio Gallery at the DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. And the Studio Gallery is the oldest DC based artists. They have over 60 artists,
Wow.
very compassionate and great, have great creations, and they run so many art shows. And my daughter takes care of the artists. She works with the board. She curates all these exhibitions. So I am mighty proud of her.
I'm sure. Yeah. No, I think it's incredible the kind of life that you have led, the kind of experiences that you have had.
We,
And
yes.
yeah, and I think it makes you who you are, and the kind of growing up, what you have tried to imbibe in your children, your husband as well has tried to do that. I think it's a wonderful way of taking your life forward. And you're a columnist, you're a poet, you're an author, you're obviously very multi-talented yourself, and clearly education played a very important role in your life, which is, from whatever you've been telling me, very apparent. So thank you so much, Ching. I've really enjoyed listening to you, and it's very inspiring to hear the story of someone who had such a different life in very difficult times, and how you were able to overcome that, and how you were able to just pack your 2 suitcases and want to live a bigger dream and move to, like you saying, America being a melting pot, and how you've created a life for yourself, and you will continue to inspire. And I think whoever is listening to this conversation will obviously understand and completely appreciate that. So thank you so much, and I've really enjoyed you being a part of Melting Pot, you being a guest who is so inspirational, and who is, who's, like I said earlier, created a world which has gone through, as you yourself mentioned, that you've lived so many different people's lives in one life. And I think that is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much. For more weekly conversations, do listen to Melting Pot on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on YouTube and on Instagram at Podcast Melting Pot. So until the next episode, this is Payal signing off.